I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting on a bench outside the airport arrivals terminal, her coat pulled tight against the November wind, 2 suitcases at her feet, and my granddaughter asleep across her lap. My daughter's eyes were fixed on the ground. She wasn't looking for anyone. She had stopped believing anyone was coming. I pulled the car to the curb, stepped out, and walked toward her without hurrying. I had learned long ago that panic never helped anyone. Clarity did. "Mom?" She looked up, and her face collapsed, the way it only does when someone has been holding themselves together for too long and suddenly sees a safe place to fall apart. "How did you know I was here?" "Your neighbor called me," I said. "She saw you leave with the girls." My granddaughter stirred on her lap. 6 years old, still in her pajamas under her coat. There was a small stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm that she had carried since she was 2. I looked at that rabbit for a moment and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder and more useful than anger. "Get in the car," I said. "Both of you." My daughter stood, carefully lifting my granddaughter without waking her. I picked up one of the suitcases. It was heavier than I expected. "I didn't know where else to go," my daughter said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to bother you." "You are never a bother," I said. "Get in the car." She had married into the Whitmore family 8 years ago. Her husband was a decent enough man, or so I had believed, quiet, careful, devoted to his mother in a way I had noted but chosen not to examine too closely at the time. His mother, on the other hand, had never bothered to conceal her feelings about my daughter. Not from the beginning. I had watched it unfold slowly, the way these things always do. The small comments at family dinners, the way my mother-in-law would correct my daughter's cooking in her own kitchen, the way she would speak about my daughter's career. She was an interior designer, successful, well-respected as if it were an amusing hobby rather than a profession. "How sweet that she has her little projects," she once said to me at Thanksgiving, loud enough for my daughter to hear from the next room. I had said, very quietly, "She billed $400,000 last year." My mother-in-law had smiled and changed the subject, but I had watched. I had always watched. My daughter told me everything that night, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank. Her husband had not stood up for her. That was the simple truth of it, buried under layers of explanation and excuse that my daughter offered on his behalf out of habit. His mother had told him that my daughter was driving a wedge between him and his family. His mother had told him that my daughter had been disrespectful, ungrateful, not the right fit for their family name. His mother had told him that it was time to make a choice, and he had made one. She told him I wasn't the kind of woman the Whitmore name deserved, my daughter said. She laughed, but there was nothing in it. She actually said that, the kind of woman the name deserved. My granddaughter was asleep upstairs in the room I kept for her, under the quilt her great-grandmother had made. I had checked on her twice already. "When did she fire you?" I asked. My daughter looked up. "How did you know about that?" "Because that's what she would do." She wouldn't stop at the house. She set down her mug. 3 weeks ago. I had been doing the renovation on the Whitmore corporate offices. She went to the project manager and told him that my work was substandard and that they were terminating my contract. She had already spoken to 2 of my other clients. I lost those contracts too. She stopped. "Mom, I had been working on that office project for 7 months." I nodded. "I didn't call you because I thought I could handle it. I kept thinking it would get better, that he would see what was happening and do something." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "He told me last week that maybe I needed to take some time, step back from work, focus on the family." His mother had suggested a therapist. For me, I was quiet for a moment. "And last night?" I said. "She came to the house. She had a key. She let herself in while we were having dinner, and she told me that she had spoken to a lawyer, that the house was in her son's name, which it is, and that I had no legal claim to it, and that it would be better for everyone," she kept saying, "better for everyone if I gathered what I needed and found somewhere else to be." My daughter's voice was perfectly flat now. She had moved past the part where it hurt and into the part that was just the facts. "He didn't say anything. He sat there and he didn't say anything, Mom. Not one word." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "Okay," I said. "Okay? Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She looked at me with the expression she had worn as a child when she couldn't tell if I was upset or not, because I had always been difficult to read in the moments that mattered most. I had learned that too. Over 63 years, the moments that required action did not benefit from visible emotion. They benefited from thought. I did not sleep that night. What my daughter did not know, what very few people knew, was that 3 years earlier I had quietly purchased a commercial building on Hartwell Avenue in the center of the city's business district. I had done it through a holding company, the way I did most things. It was not a secret, exactly. It was simply information that I had never found a reason to share. The Whitmore family had been leasing the top 2 floors of that building for 11 years. Their lease was up for renewal in 6 weeks. I had already received 2 phone calls from their property manager about the terms. I had not yet responded to either of them. I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I had a folder I had been building for about 2 years, not with any specific intention, but because I am by nature a person who keeps records. My late husband used to tease me about it. "Eleanor," he would say, "you document everything." He meant it affectionately. He understood that documentation was how I processed the world. The folder contained emails, contracts, a voicemail my daughter had forwarded to me 14 months ago, almost as an afterthought, in which her mother-in-law could be heard telling a mutual acquaintance that my daughter had married up and ought to remember it. There were 2 instances where my daughter's former clients, the ones she had lost, had mentioned in passing that they had received calls expressing concerns about the quality of her work. Those calls, in both cases, had come from a woman who identified herself as a family associate. I also had, because I am thorough, the financial records of a small interior design firm that had been incorporated 8 months ago. The sole director of that firm was my daughter's mother-in-law. Its first 2 clients were the same companies that had terminated my daughter's contracts. I called my attorney at 7:30 in the morning. She was already in her office. I had always appreciated that about her. "I need you to pull together everything we have on the Hartwell building lease," I said, "and I need you to look into something for me. Tortious interference, client solicitation. I'll send you what I have." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," my attorney said. "What happened?" "My daughter happened," I said, "and someone made the mistake of thinking I wouldn't notice. My daughter slept until 10. I made pancakes for my granddaughter and let her watch cartoons, and I did not tell my daughter what I was doing, because there was no reason to involve her in the mechanics of it. She had enough to carry. What I discovered over the following 2 weeks, with the help of my attorney and a private investigator I had used once before for a business matter, was both worse and more clarifying than I had expected. The mother-in-law had been systematically working to undermine my daughter for at least 3 years. The business interference was the most recent and most documentable piece of it, but there was more. She had contacted the director of a nonprofit board my daughter sat on and suggested, falsely, that my daughter had misused grant funds. She had told her son, repeatedly and in writing there were text messages obtained legally that my daughter had been unfaithful. There was no evidence for this. There had never been any evidence for this. She had simply said it often enough that her son had begun to believe it. I read through everything carefully. I did not rush. Then I did 2 things. The first thing I did was instruct my attorney to notify the Whitmore family's property manager that we would not be renewing their lease on the current terms. The new terms included a 40% increase in monthly rent and a requirement for a full building inspection, which I had every legal right to request. The response came within 24 hours. Could we meet to discuss? Of course we could. The second thing I did was contact my daughter's former clients directly. I introduced myself, explained my connection to my daughter's work. I had, in fact, referred both of them to her originally, which they may have forgotten, and mentioned that I had recently come across some information regarding the circumstances of their contract terminations. I did not make accusations. I simply asked if they would be willing to sit down with my attorney and review what I had. Both of them agreed. My daughter found out what I was doing on a Thursday afternoon, about 10 days after she had arrived at my house. She came into my study and found me on a call with my attorney. I held up one finger and finished the call, and when I turned around, her arms were crossed and her expression was the one she had inherited from me, the one where you cannot tell if the person is about to cry or about to dismantle something. "Mom," she said. What are you doing? Sitting down, I said. Would you like to as well? She sat. I told her. I laid it out plainly, without drama, the way I always preferred to handle things. I told her about the clients. I told her about the text messages. I told her about the nonprofit board. I told her about the building. She was quiet for a long time. You own the building, she said finally. I do. Their offices. Yes. She stared at me. For how long? 3 years. And you never told me. I never had a reason to, I said. Until now. She put her face in her hands. I waited. After a moment she looked up and her eyes were wet but her jaw was set, and I thought, not for the first time, that she was stronger than she believed herself to be. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, your mother-in-law has a decision to make. The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in my attorney's conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown office building. I had asked my attorney to arrange it as a lease negotiation, which was true. I had not mentioned what else it would be. My daughter's mother-in-law arrived with her own attorney and her son. I had not expected him. I registered his presence, noted the fact that he could not quite meet my eyes when he sat down, and decided to set it aside for later. I sat at the head of the table. I wore a gray blazer I had owned for 12 years. I did not smile, but I was not unkind. I had learned that anger, displayed, gives the other person somewhere to put their attention. Composure gives them nothing. My attorney presented the new lease terms first. There was immediate pushback. The increases were unreasonable. The inspection requirements were excessive. Surely there was room to negotiate, given the length of the relationship between the Whitmore business and this property. I listened to all of it without speaking. When the other attorney had finished, I nodded slightly to my own attorney, who opened a second folder. We'd also like to discuss, my attorney said, in her most pleasant and entirely dangerous voice, a few matters related to business practices. Specifically, certain communications that appear to have affected the professional standing of a third party. She laid out the documentation on the table. The client communications, the text messages, the timeline of the competing interior design firms in corporation relative to my daughter's contract terminations, the contact with the nonprofit board. The room was very quiet. My daughter's mother-in-law's attorney leaned over and spoke quietly to her. She had a particular expression on her face, the expression of someone who has spent years operating on the assumption that there are no consequences for what happens inside a family, and who is encountering, perhaps for the first time, the experience of being wrong about that. This is family business, she said. Her voice was steady but not quite steady. This has nothing to do with. My client's daughter lost 3 contracts totaling approximately $280,000 in revenue, my attorney said. She was also the subject of false communications to a nonprofit board of directors. These are not family matters. They are civil matters. Her son, sitting to her left, had gone very still. He was looking at the documents in front of him. He had not said a single word since he sat down. I watched him read. I have been in business for over 30 years. I started with nothing, built something, made decisions that cost me and decisions that paid off. And through all of it, I have observed that the most dangerous thing you can do is assume you know everything about the people around you. People have more dimensions than you allow them. People have histories and resources and patience that you do not see because you are not looking. My daughter's mother-in-law had never looked at me. Not really. I was a background figure. The woman who showed up at holidays. The mother whose daughter had, in her estimation, gotten lucky. She had never thought to ask what I did. She had never thought to ask how I spent my time, or what I owned, or who I knew. That is not arrogance exactly. It is a failure of curiosity, and it tends, in my experience, to be expensive. The outcome of the meeting was not immediate. These things rarely are. The legal conversation continued for several weeks, and there were letters and counterletters and a period of negotiation that I mostly left to my attorney because that is what attorneys are for. What I can tell you is what happened. The Whitmore business did not renew their lease at Hartwell Avenue. They relocated, at considerable expense, to a smaller space across the city. The move disrupted their operations for several months and cost them 2 of their own long-term clients, who found the transition inconvenient. The tortious interference claim was settled before it ever reached a courtroom. My daughter received a payment that more than compensated for her lost contracts. As part of the settlement, the competing design firm was dissolved. The nonprofit board, once they reviewed the documentation I had shared, sent my daughter a formal letter reinstating her position and expressing their regret for any confusion. Her husband called her 6 weeks after the meeting. Then he called again. My daughter did not return the first call or the second. On the third, she answered, and they talked for a long time in the garden while I sat inside with my granddaughter, and we put together a puzzle of the solar system that had more pieces than either of us had anticipated. I do not know what the future of my daughter's marriage is. That is not mine to decide. What I told my daughter on the evening after the meeting, when she asked me how I had stayed so calm through all of it, was this. I wasn't calm, I said. I was focused. Those are different things. She thought about that. How did you know what to do? She asked. I considered the question honestly. Because I've lived long enough, I said, to know that the loudest people in a room are very rarely the most powerful ones. Your mother-in-law made noise for years because noise was all she had. She never thought to look at what I had, because she never thought to look at me at all. I paused. That was her mistake. My granddaughter finished the puzzle herself, mostly. She was missing Saturn's rings for a while, and then she found the piece under the corner of the rug and snapped it into place and looked up at me with an expression of profound satisfaction. Grandma, she said, I found it. I see that, I said. Good work. She went back to studying the completed puzzle with her small face very serious, and I watched her, and I thought about the things we teach the people who come after us, not the lessons we intend to teach, but the ones they absorb from watching how we move through the world, how we handle the things that are done to us, whether we collapse or go quiet and focused and begin to think. My daughter called me a few months later. She had taken on 2 new clients, both significant projects. Her work had been written up in a regional design publication. She sounded different on the phone than she had in years, lighter, cleaner, like someone who had set down a weight she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it wasn't hers to carry. I want you to know something, she said. What's that? I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner. When all of this was happening, I kept thinking I had to handle it myself, that calling you would mean I'd failed. You hadn't failed, I said. I know that now. She was quiet for a moment. I just didn't want to need rescuing. You didn't need rescuing, I said. You needed backup. There's a difference. You were already standing. I just stood next to you. She laughed, and it was a real laugh, unguarded and clear, and I closed my eyes for a second and just listened to it. I have thought often, since all of this happened, about the women who go through something like what my daughter went through and have no one standing next to them, who sit on airport benches in November with their children and their suitcases and look at the ground because they have stopped believing anyone is coming. I think about what it takes to survive that, alone, with nothing but your own will and whatever fragments of yourself you have managed to hold on to. I got lucky, in certain ways. I worked hard and I was careful and I made good decisions and I also got lucky, and I know the difference. Not everyone does. What I know for certain is this. The women who look past you, who decide before you've spoken what you are and what you're worth and what you're capable of, they are counting on your silence. They are counting on you to absorb what they do without documentation, without attorneys, without the cold and patient willingness to let things unfold on your own timeline rather than theirs. Don't be silent. Don't be rushed. Don't assume that the noisiest person in the room has assessed you correctly. And if someone ever tells you that you are not the kind of woman a certain name deserves, write it down, keep it, you may need it later. You almost certainly will.